A patient received a treatment, right? The tumor responded and it looks great. After 3 months, they grew back, right? And become resistant to the treatment you were giving. So the reason is because not all, within the same patient tumor, not all the tumor cells are the same, right? It's not completely homogeneous. It's almost thinking about, as a human society, we sometimes talk about why it's so challenging to cure cancer is because you are fighting evolution.
This is a long war, a series of skirmishes, some of which are won, and it will be years before we can say we have conquered cancer, because it isn't one disease, it's hundreds of different diseases, and each one must be dealt with in its own separate way.
Good morning and welcome to Washington Post Live. I'm Paige Winfield Cunningham, Deputy Newsletter Editor here at the Post. And today we bring you two segments on cancer care. Later we will be speaking with Representative Brian Higgins, who's co-head of the House Cancer Caucus. But first I am pleased to speak with the Whitehead Institute's Dr. Bob Weinberg and Shilin Chen, Chief Scientific Officer of the Terasaki Institute and the scientific founder of Xylus, a precision oncology company. Dr. Weinberg and Dr. Shen, welcome to you both.
Hi, thank you for the invitation.
Dr. Weinberg, let's start with you first with kind of a big picture question here. You have written the textbook literally on cancer and you've studied cancer for decades. Just speaking really broadly, how has our understanding of cancer evolved since you first started, and what have been some of the most big, significant advances in cancer care?
Well, when I started this, the origins of human cancer were poorly understood. We really didn't understand why normal cells became converted into cancer cells. And changed starting 1975, 76, almost half a century ago, because over the intervening time, we causes cancer. The faith, the hope was that understanding the causes of disease would lead, as day follows night, to cures. And in some instances, that has been vindicated, that idea. In others, it simply is an elusive goal where knowing the origins of the cancer does not lead directly to treatments for it. Cancer is a highly complex and variable disease, unlike, for example, cardiovascular disease, which by contrast is very, very simple. And that explains the reason why some cancers are now reasonably treatable and curable, whereas others continue to resist truly effective care and cure.
And Dr. Shen, I'd like to toss the same question to you, but I want to focus on treatment. What are some of the biggest changes in terms of treatment that we've seen over the course of your career?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing, kind of following up with Dr. Weinberg's comments, is about how can you deal with the heterogeneity or diversity, and and as a technologist, right? Thanks for Dr. Weinberg's a lot of groundbreaking discovery. We understand those driving forces, but how can you develop a technology that's scalable, that can be used in the clinic, that can be used in scale by pharma companies to find a next generation treatment? So I think that's very important. Now we are entering this translational stage, that converting those discoveries into technology platforms, for example, genomic sequencing, for example, organoids, these technologies to really finding out the more precise treatments for the patients.
Yeah, I want to drill into this idea of the diversity that we see in cancer. And we are talking about almost like a huge array of different diseases and different, genetic sequences. And, I know many people, many of our listeners are probably familiar with this idea of precision medicine, of specifically targeting cancers. But Dr. Shen, can you explain that a little bit and how our understanding of cancer has evolved from sort of a single disease to many different kinds of diseases?
Yes. So, I was the steering chair committee for the NCI, right, Patient-Derived Model Consortium, Tissue Engineering Consortium, and I always get asked the question, "Oh, have you guys conquered cancer yet?" Right, to Dr. Weinberg's point, my question is always which cancer type you're talking about, and which patient populations. So we made a lot of progress, but oftentimes the general audience kind of seeing cancer as one thing, and seems we are never there. Yeah, kind of. So coming back to and answer your questions, I think that really the kind of the effort is being able to understand the genomic composition of each cancer type, and then being able to model them preclinically before we put them into the patients. So if you think about FDA came up the Modernization Act 2.0, right? Really try to promote patient-derived models to be able to better capture the patient tumor for us to develop therapeutics before we run these very expensive clinical trials, assuming patients are more homogeneous population and often, have costly failures.
Dr. Weinberg, I know that we often
If
refer
I
to, yeah, go ahead,
if
Dr.
I
Weinberg.
if I may emphasize one point, within a given tumor, there's not just one kind of cancer cell type. As the tumor develops, the cells within the tumor begin to diversify from one another, and therefore there may be subpopulations of cells within a tumor that are susceptible to elimination by an existing therapy, and others that are quite resistant. And this intra-tumor heterogeneity is really what thwarts many kinds of what would otherwise be highly successful, indeed curative therapies.
Well, on that note, Dr. Weinberg, I did want to ask you, when doctors are talking to patients and just kind of broadly speaking, we talk about cancer in terms of where it's found in the body, right? Breast cancer, skin cancer, et cetera. But I wonder, I'd love to get your thoughts on, given that there are many different subtypes within this, is talking about cancer in that way the most helpful for patients, or is there another way that we could talk about it so that they could understand exactly what you're saying about tumors having different genetic makeups and different treatments being needed depending on what that is?
Well, I think it's conceptually a bit challenging to talk about a tumor as being a collection of diverse cancer cell types. One really has to discuss with the patient the dominant cell type, cancer cell type within a tumor, and how one would treat it, leaving out for the moment the fact that they're the same tumor that are not so susceptible to elimination. So one has to start with simplicity. And if one observes resistance therapy, then one can begin to delve into the complexity of the cells within a single human tumor, not to speak of the differences between tumors from one patient to another.
And follow up with Dr. Weinberg's point, I think when you translate into patients, also what does it mean for treatment, right? I think that the notion of one treatment cure the patient, again, for surgery, sometimes possible for very early stage cancer patients, but then we're kind of really, growing into an era where the cancer might be a more continuous, right, chronic control kind of disease where you have an effective treatment, but then there's a subpopulation is going to emerge. And the key is how to have a closed loop in terms of detection methods to detect, the emergence of new resistant clones early, and then have the treatment to target them. For example, the recent advance of cell-free DNA, where you can test in the blood, detecting got new tumor clones or minimal residual disease. These additional population early on and be able to find out treatment to treat these patients. I think that will kind of really evolve. So we will continually battling the evolution of cancer and keep it under control. That might bring a lot of benefits for patients.
And let's talk for a minute about the role of genetics versus behavior in terms of cancer. And of course, we all want to think that we can eat this or that food or do this or that exercise to prevent cancer. But Dr. Shen, can you talk a little bit about what we've learned there in terms of the balance between genetics and behavior? And of course, I know this is also different depending on which kind of cancer. But can you address that?
Yeah, great question. And I think first, as Dr. Weinberg pointed out, the cancer is a heterogeneous population. You have different cancer population. And the second is that the tumor also doesn't grow in a vacuum. They grow in a microenvironment, means they interact with many other cell types like immune and stromal cells that get reprogrammed by cancer and becoming kind of accomplice, supporting their growth. And then there's the whole body or systemic effect where the nutrients, metabolism, immune systems, all of them are play into the cancer growth. And last things, let's not forget, right? The cancer cells themselves often don't kill the patient. It's really the organ failure or cachexia, which is the wasting away diseases, as many of you heard about, right? You associate cancer patients with very skinny and lose appetite and lose muscle, right? So these are phenomenon that cancer causes that and end up doing harm to the patients. So now I think, besides looking at the cancer genetics, we have to look at the cancer as a more holistic disease and thinking about treatments in a more holistic way.
And Dr. Weinberg, as you reflect back on your career, I know we've seen huge improvements in survival rates for some types of cancer, less so for other types. But overall, how optimistic or pessimistic are you when you're looking at how the progress that we have made over the last few decades?
Well, we've made enormous progress in certain areas. You should know the listeners know adjusted mortality from breast cancer is down by 40 to 43% over the last several decades. That's a major gain. And that compares with other kinds of cancers, which to date seem relatively bulletproof. For example, pancreatic cancer is extremely difficult to treat successfully or to cure. The same can be said for advanced lung cancer. This is a long, hard slog, and the big successes are not going to come easily. We thought they might 20 or 30 years ago, but that initial optimism was not warranted. Still, at present, we have so many different technologies that can begin to anticipate the evasive maneuvers that cancer cells may undertake in response to being confronted with toxic therapies that we throw against them. That having been said, you can ask the question, will we ever cure cancer? Well, right now, that's a distant goal if you imply curing all kinds of cancer. How can we best reduce mortality, which may be part of your question? Prevention is critically important, as you asked before. Some of the major reductions in cancer mortality have come over the last decade or two from reductions in, for example, smoking and reductions in diet. So prevention is ultimately vastly more effective in preventing the onset of a disease than trying to cure the disease once it appears.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And Dr. Shen, I know that there's increasing talk about, just living with cancer and almost treating it like a chronic disease. Can I get your thoughts on that? Is that kind of where we're headed here?
Yes, I think, again, as Dr. Weinberg said, right, different cancer type are very different. We made a great progress for example, a lot of blood cancers now with new technologies such as cell therapies, we can almost eradicate them. Solid tumors, means tumors growing the organ is much more challenging. And often because of the diversity, the heterogeneity, the access to the tumor, the suppressive environment, there's many factors that making them more challenging. But for this cancer type, as I said, if we, as Dr. Weinberg pointed out, if we combine early diagnostic technologies that's really booming right now with kind of more real-time treatments that we can have more precise treatment, more adaptive treatment that according to this diagnostic technology and can apply to them patients early or making preventative actions, that might really bring the biggest difference to patient survival. For example, right now, I give one example. Nowadays, a lot of patients had a surgery. Before, we just had to wait out, 2 years, 4 years to see if this tumor will relapse or recur. Now, with the cell-free DNA technology, we can detect the reemergence of tumor much earlier in the blood. But then the key is how you're going to treat these patients, because the patients tell clinicians, say, look, what are you going to do about it? And we said, we don't have the guidelines to treat, right? These kind of, early detection while you cannot see them on CT scan or MRI. So I think there's really need a lot of technology development on those end to really kind of close the loop and being able to, start treating those disease earlier rather than wait till they kind of grow back again and become a much more challenging problem.
So I know when we're talking about survival rates, overall the news is great and we're seeing survival rates go up. But I wanted to raise one point I know is of great concern, and that is cancer among younger Americans, particularly women, is on the rise, with certain types of cancer, including gastrointestinal, endocrine, and breast cancers, climbing at the fastest rates. Dr. Weinberg, what do you attribute to this? And do you have any recommendations to correct this trend?
Well, we don't really understand with great clarity and precision why the rates of cancer are increasing, for example, among young women. But we do know ways to reduce general cancer incidence. That is how often it appears. And I'll just mention that avoiding smoking, having a lean body mass, and eating a relatively vegetarian diet should be able together to reduce the incidence, that is how often it occurs, by as much percent of cancer. And again, clearly, tumors that don't appear don't have to be cured. It could be that, in fact, the rapidly increasing risk of cancer among young American women is in part tied, believe it or not, to obesity. Obesity is, after smoking, the second most common cause of cancer. And for example, in certain kinds of cancer, like ovarian cancer, the risk of developing this kind of tumor increases by as much as a factor of 4 in heavily obese women. So diet and dietary practices and lifestyle are actually important in preventing the appearance of cancers.
And I just want to
Dr.
follow up on Dr. Weinberg's point, right? This is excellent. So I can have my personal, a little anecdotal observation, but I grew up in China. I remember when I was very young and the last generation, right? There's very few people get colon cancer and some of these kind of diseases. And nowadays it's become very prevalent. So that's kind of suggesting, and once they, especially in big cities, I grew up in Shanghai, where people kind of adopting more Western diet. You have a lot more, kind of fat, fructose, processed food, a lot more red meat, right? If you think about the difference now and back then, and now if you look at those populations, the diseases like a colon cancer, the GI disease, or breast cancer are really kind of catching up and following the same trend. So what that's suggesting is that it's not all just genetics. I think the lifestyle play a big role in kind of earlier onset of those diseases. Of course, obesity rate, right, in let's say in China, kind of really shot up significantly compared to when I grew up. So that's all circumstantial evidence suggesting that these lifestyle factors really played a role in early onset.
And Dr. Shen, we're going to have to wrap up in a minute, but I do want to ask you, we have the chair of the House Cancer Caucus coming on to speak with us next. And I'm wondering, do you have a message for him in terms of what the federal government could do in terms of advancing the fight against cancer?
I think there are really two messages. One is we have to be persistent. I think it's been going on for a while, right? Sometimes I hear people, my Uber driver is like, hey, well, what are scientists doing? Like, seems we are not getting closer. But as Dr. Weinberg pointed out, we are getting much closer. But because it's such a complex disease, people see from outside as one disease, oftentimes don't appreciate the significant progress we have made. Like compared to 20 years ago, we are completely in a different kind of stage right now, and we can kind of see we are inching closer. And the second is really we are talking about individual patients, and while we make every progress, while we see these patients, you see their family, the impact made on them. So I think of, really thinking about a policy, I think we need to be persistent. We need to have better dialogue between policymakers and scientists for them to really understand where are the areas that give you best return on investment, right? In terms of what are the areas that we are in a cusp of making significant impact for patients, and we should double down on those areas.
And Dr. Weinberg, let me toss that question to you too. Do you have a message for Congressman Higgins?
Yes, reaching the cure for cancer was said 50 years ago when President Nixon started the war on cancer, that the disease was going to be cured. But as we've learned over the intervening half century, cancer is actually a very evasive and elusive foe, and we'll have to take one step at a time. We're not going to cure cancer next year or maybe even within a decade. Some tumors will begin to become vulnerable to elimination, whereas others will remain as resistant if you are now. But we have to keep pushing, because as we keep pushing and as we continue to be patient, we will make progress, slow but steady progress in a whole series of different kinds of cancer. It's not as if this is all standing still. Cancer therapy is being made more and more effective every year.
Well, we are out of time, unfortunately, but Dr. Weinberg, Dr. Shen, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you very much.
Please stay with us for the next segment of this conversation with Congressman Brian Higgins.
My name is Angie Reed. I was diagnosed with an esthesioneuroblastoma. The Proton Center is a pretty special place.
I'm most excited about the potential to eradicate and eliminate cancer. The burden of cancer is real, and our research and our efforts here can help everyone.
My doctors have instilled a confidence in me that my life is going to continue down the path that I've always envisioned.
Hello, I'm Ruth Umo, Leadership Editor at Fortune. The early detection of cancer allows for intervention that slows cancer spread and helps treat it at a more curable stage. Joining me to discuss options for screening and the importance of an accurate diagnosis is Andrea Richardson, the Peter and Judy Kovler Professor in Breast Cancer Research at Johns Hopkins Medicine, National Capital Region, as well as Pune Razavi, Director of Breast Imaging at Johns Hopkins Medicine, National Capital. Welcome to the both of you. Dr. Richardson, I'd love to kick things off with you first. What types of cancer are detectable through screening, and what are the types of screening options available?
We have a number of different screening tests that are available. One of the oldest screening tests is Pap smears for cervical cancer, the implementation of which led to a big decrease in the mortality for women from cervical cancer. We also have mammograms and other forms of breast imaging that detect breast cancer at an earlier stage, colonoscopy or fecal DNA testing for colon cancer, and PSA is a blood test that is a screening test for prostate cancer. And then finally, we have low-dose annual chest CT for lung cancer screening for patients who are at high risk of lung cancer.
Quite a few options there. How significant is an accurate diagnosis to determine the best treatment, and what are the complexities of doing so?
Now that we have the ability to detect cancers at an early stage, the diagnosis is usually by a core needle biopsy or a fine needle aspirate that withdraws just a small amount of tissue. So our diagnosis requires a lot of expertise and experience to be able to make the correct diagnosis of cancer in that situation. We also have to do a lot of molecular testing and immunohistochemical testing to determine the biomarkers that will determine what type of treatment the patient will receive. For instance, if a patient has lung cancer, we want to know if they have a particular mutation, because there's different drugs that are useful for different mutations.
Let's touch on that expertise that's needed, Dr. Razavi. How important is it to choose a diagnostic specialist to conduct one screening?
Well, it is extremely important to choose a specialist to interpreted screening study. For example, when it comes to breast cancer, all of the radiologists at all the Hopkins sites, including Sibley and Suburban and the Bethesda site, are all subspecialty trained and specialized in looking for small breast cancers. Our goal is to find breast cancer early to decrease mortality and morbidity associated with it.
Yeah. Talk to us about Johns Hopkins' multidisciplinary approach to assessing cases and to developing treatment plans.
We're very proud of our multidisciplinary approach and program here at all the Hopkins sites, including Sibley and Suburban. When a patient is diagnosed with breast cancer, there's a smooth handoff from the breast imaging department to the breast surgeons who only do breast surgery. They are not general surgeons. They are all subspecialty trained in breast surgery and taking care of breast cancer patients. We work closely as a team with the medical oncologists who are dedicated to breast cancer as well as radiation oncologists. It's a seamless approach. We want to make it easy for the patient to not have to take on the burden of coordinating her own care. We take that on.
Yeah, quite a comprehensive approach for the both of you. Are there any developments in cancer screening that we should look out for as we move forward?
Well, when it comes to breast imaging, we're very excited about AI. AI for mammography is showing very promising data. It is not going to take the place of a mammographer at this point, but it is going to be useful and helpful as a double read. So our hope is to read the mammograms in conjunction with the AI as a double read.
In terms of diagnosis, AI is also coming into the field of pathology. And for screening, we have new blood tests based on circulating free DNA that can detect a lot of cancers that currently don't have screening tests available. So that's one of the new developments that's coming down the pike.
Yeah, great to see the rapid progression in this space. And this is certainly a critical conversation as we look to improve cancer survival rates. Thank you both for your time, doctors. And now back to the Washington Post.
Thank you.
Welcome back. For those of you just joining us, I'm Paige Winfield Cunningham, Deputy Newsletter Editor here at the Post. And I am now joined by Congressman Brian Higgins, Democrat from New York, who is also co-chair of the House Cancer Caucus. Congressman, welcome to Post Live.
Happy to be with you, Paige. Thank you.
Congressman Higgins, it's obviously been an eventful couple of weeks for the House, but as all of you try to get back to normal business, can you tell me a little bit about what the House Cancer Caucus does, what are its goals, who are its members, and how is it prioritized in Congress?
It's a bipartisan group of members of Congress who are pledged to promote federal government funding for cancer research. It's very, very important, as the doctor said on the previous segment, that we be persistent and getting the proper funding to the National Cancer Institute and National Institutes of Health to fund all important cancer research is critical to the success of reducing death and suffering from cancer.
So on that note of funding, I know that funding for the National Institutes of Health and by extension, the Cancer Institute has long been bipartisan. Although, of course, lately we've seen obviously a very fractious House. Do you expect it to continue to be a bipartisan issue going forward?
I do. I think the members are committed. In many cases, they will have a comprehensive cancer institute in their districts, of which there are 72 that are designated by the National Cancer Institute as a comprehensive cancer center. I have one in my district, Roswell Park Cancer Institute, and there are many members, Brian Fitzpatrick in Pennsylvania, Kathy Castor in Florida, and most of the members have an association with an institute that does cancer research in their districts. But I will tell you a story. And this is when I really kind of got involved as a member of Congress in this issue. It was back in 2005 that the head of the National Cancer Institute, they established a campaign called the 2015 campaign, 2015. The objective of which was to eliminate all death and suffering attributed to cancer by the year 2015. This was 2005. That evening, when all the cancer advocates converged on Capitol Hill, Congress passed a resolution in support of the National Cancer Institute's goal of eliminating all death and suffering due to cancer by 2015. 6 months later, Congress cut funding for cancer research. And it occurred to me at that point that the resolution was not, it didn't have any force of law or budget behind it, but it was an expression of Congress's support for the goals. But that doesn't mean anything unless there is law and funding behind it. And it occurred to me that the cancer community, those who are involved in cancer research and Congress, has a communication problem, and that we needed to bring those two communities closer together so people understand the importance of cancer research. And innovation is by its very definition inefficient. Most clinical trials in the cancer space fail up to 90%. But the only failure in cancer research is when you quit or you're forced to quit because of lack of funding. And that's why the themes that were presented today, prevention, early detection, are critically important. Smoking, for example, 90% of all lung cancers are attributed to smoking. There's a report out of the University of California, Davis, that says there are 12 other cancers, and those deaths could be reduced by 50% if you eliminated smoking altogether. So that's in the area of prevention. Just in the area of early detection, and I think this is critically important as well, less than 10% of cancer deaths are attributed to the original tumor. It's when cancer moves, when it advances, when it metastasizes to another organ, is when an organ that you can't live without, that's when it becomes lethal. So if you are diagnosed with a cancer at stage 1 or 2, your likelihood of survival beyond 5 years of your designation is much higher than it would be if you were diagnosed at stage 3 or 4.
I want to go back to what you said about that very ambitious goal of 2005 that was set then. Obviously, we unfortunately didn't achieve that, but I know President Biden has said that his ultimate goal is to cut cancer death rates by at least 50% in the next 25 years, while also turning more cancers from death sentences into chronic diseases people can live with. What's your analysis of where we are towards that goal and how likely we are to achieve it?
Yeah, I think what's most important here, it's good to set up goals and recognizing that they're not always achievable, specific to the time frame within which. What's most important is that we're making progress toward the goal. And I think when you look at since 1991, cancer deaths have been reduced by about 30% or even more. And that is good progress toward the goal. And that just underscores the importance of doing robust funding for cancer research throughout the nation. The federal government, as you indicated in your earlier introduction, NCI, the National Cancer Institute, is the largest funder of cancer research in the world. And as I said, it's very, very expensive. So, the pharmaceutical companies aren't doing the basic research because there's no profit motive in that. It's all costs. But the idea is to advance cancer research, to develop new treatments so that the pharmaceutical companies will pick it up and market various products in the cancer space. So I think it's very important to understand that cancer research is a public-private enterprise, and we depend on both to develop promising therapies. If you look at the history of cancer throughout the world, there's only three ways you could deal with it. You could cut it out with surgery, you could burn it out with radiation, or you could poison it out with chemical or chemotherapy. Now we have found ways to enhance the body's own immune system, not only to kill cancer, but to find it, which is often very, very difficult as well. And all of this is a direct result of the progress that's been made as it relates to cancer research. Now we have, targeted therapies. David G. Nathan, the president emeritus at Dana-Farber Cancer Institute, wrote a book called The Cancer Revolution. And in it, he focused on those areas of targeted treatments like Herceptin. Trastuzumab is the chemical name, but that targeted therapy kills the cancer cell without destroying the healthy cells. Same is true for a drug called Gleevec for gastrointestinal stromal tumors. And so we see, throughout the most recent history, good progress has been made because of the research dollars that have gone into developing new promising therapies, which extend life, but also extend the quality of life as you're going through your treatments.
You mentioned the role the federal government plays in funding cancer research. How would you score the federal government at this juncture for the resources it's providing? And do we need more?
I think we certainly need more. Last year or this year, Congress will authorize about $7.8 billion to the National Cancer Institute, which is an improvement of about $500 million over last year. But you can always use more. As I said, this is a difficult thing to research because most clinical trials, think of all the money, all the effort, all the hopes that goes into developing a promising therapy. And then when you go to the clinical trial phase that tests the efficacy and the safety of a drug, and many times they fail, but you got to persist. As the previous speakers said, it's very, very important that that we recognize that the only failure in cancer research is when you quit or you're forced to quit because of lack of funding.
I want to take one moment to ask you about Monica Bertagnoli, who has been leading the National Cancer Institute. And of course, now her nomination to lead the National Institutes of Health is moving on the Hill. Any thoughts on her work at the Institute and how she might do as head of NIH?
Yeah, she's great. She's terrific. She's a rock star. And not only is she a researcher, she's also a cancer survivor. And she speaks, to groups in ways that they can understand in compelling ways, which underscores, the importance of prevention, the importance of early detection, and all the things, all the tools that are available to us to ensure that we can prevent cancer from occurring in the first place. But also, if you are diagnosed with cancer, it's an early detection, so as to increase the quality of the experience based on survivorship.
You may have seen that recently here at the Post, our health and science team published a series on the declining life expectancy of Americans. And one of the pieces in particular looked at the difference between red states and blue states and has seen, unfortunately, larger declines in red states. Now, I know this is controversial and there are a lot of factors at play here, but I'm just wondering, as a Democratic member, how do you think about that? And do you think GOP policies are playing any role here in this red state, blue state divide on life expectancy?
Yeah, first of all, I would say this is not controversial. This is a fact of life that we need to deal with. And, when you look at the Affordable Care Act, which I was proud to work on and support, 35 million people got health care that previously didn't have it. It used to be that if you had a kid that was stuck with childhood cancer, an insurance company could deny you coverage because of a pre-existing condition. You can't do that anymore. It's against the law. So, we have to continue to invest in, the health and safety of the American people. And when you see those things declining, you are obviously going to see a reduction in life expectancy in the richest country in the world. We don't have the best healthcare system in the world. We need to do much better. The Affordable Care Act was not nearly enough. My colleagues on the other side of the aisle, they voted 50 times to repeal the Affordable Care Act. Now, typically, if you're going to destroy something, you better have a more positive alternative. There was never a more positive alternative, meaning that a lot of people were going to lose the health care that they were depending on. There are essential services that have to be covered under an insurance policy because, oftentimes you look at the history of health insurance in this country, your premiums get jacked up because of copays, because of deductibles. And then when you go to use the healthcare that you've already paid too much for, you found prior to the Affordable Care Act that there was very little underlying health insurance. That is a situation that has to be improved upon. And it has been since the Affordable Care Act, but we can't stop there. We have to continue to invest in important research that will increase survivorship of our people so that life expectancy does not decline. This is a very, very important issue. It is not controversial. It is scientific fact, and it's alarming, and it should be to every member of Congress that we need to and should be doing much better.
That same series also talked about smoking rates and some differences there, higher smoking rates in red states compared with blue states. And you had mentioned, I know that lung cancer is a particular focus of yours. Obviously, we have made huge progress overall as a country on lowering smoking rates. But in your view, what else needs to be done on that?
Well, lung cancer is the deadliest cancer. 154 deaths a year. People die from cancer out of nearly 2 million people that will be new cancer cases. So that's very, very important that we focus in on that. And it's a prevention issue. It's informing people. But currently, only 6% of those who are eligible get screened for lung cancer. And, that just doesn't do it. So you've got to get into those states with campaigns that associate lung cancer and the lethal nature of lung cancer with the alarming rates of deaths every single year. And lung cancer, you've seen the commercials. There's a lot of suffering. There's a lot of pain that goes with it, not only for the afflicted, but those who love the afflicted. So there's an incentive for all of us to do much better. And as I said, the United States is 5% of the world's population. We're 25% of the world's economy. The National Cancer Institute is the largest cancer research institution in all the world. If the United States does not provide leadership for its own people, but also for the value of these treatments in this science in terms of being a basis from which new therapies are developed, there's no leadership in the world without the United States in the cancer space, in the cancer research space.
I'm struck by what you said about only 6% of people who are eligible getting screening for lung cancer. You hear all the time about when you need to start getting your mammogram or your colonoscopy. Why do you think it is that people are so unaware of screening for lung cancer? I think people know they shouldn't smoke, but there just seems to be a lot less publicity around the screening part of it.
Well, the one thing we know is, there's a reason we study the humanities. It's a study of human nature, and human nature never changes. And I think there's a fear factor. People don't want to, they think if they ignore it, it will go away. But we're obviously learning that that's not the case. So there's a reluctance. And I think, right here in Buffalo at Roswell Park Cancer Institute, we have screening that goes out to the neighborhoods. It's a mobile screening unit, and that has been helpful. and increasing the number of people that get screened for lung cancer. These are in economically disadvantaged areas where people just don't have the transportation, don't have the time to come into an institution, a building. So Roswell is going into the neighborhoods to promote cancer screening, which makes it easier for people to get the screening that they need and hopefully get diagnosed at a very early stage before the lethality of lung cancer sets in.
Well, Congressman, we're almost out of time, but before I let you go, I do want to ask you a non-cancer related question, and that is related to the fact you're on the Gun Violence Prevention Task Force. We saw another mass shooting last week. What would you like to see Congress do in the wake of the tragedy in Maine?
Well, ban assault weapons, number one. If you look at all these shootings, from Sandy Hook to Buffalo, it was one shooter that should not have had a gun and a multitude of fatalities in a very, very short period of time. Military-style weapons should not be in the hands of civilians, particularly those who have a history of mental health illnesses. All of these shootings, virtually all of these shootings in the United States was one shooter with a automatic weapon, assault rifle, that killed a lot of people in a very short period of time. That in and of itself should underscore the severity of the problem, but also provide some clarity about what is necessary to solve that problem.
Well, Congressman Higgins, this has been a fascinating conversation. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
And thank you to our audience for joining us. To check out what interviews we have coming up, please head to WashingtonPostLive.com to register and find out more information about all of our upcoming programs. I'm Paige Winfield Cunningham, and thanks for joining us.